Moon Knight is Marvel's Batman, and honestly, he's just better. Moon Knight is Marvel's Batman, and that's okay. Anyone who tries to tell you he isn't is simply just wrong. The comparisons to Batman are way too numerous, and actually keep growing as time goes on, and I think that makes him a better and more fun character to read. Now, how is copying Batman's shtick make him such a good character to read? I think, of course, what makes him such a fun read are the differences. And while the differences are few, they are quite notable. And they add that little bit of flair that I think would interest most people if you've fallen out of love with Batman lately. But that's a bold statement. So what exactly makes him Marvel's Batman? And I want to break that down for you here real quick. And a lot of it is pretty obvious on face value. He's the Moon Knight. Much like Batman, he primarily operates at night. He chooses an iconic symbol to wear. While for Batman it's the bat, for him it's the moon. When you see that crescent moon in the darkness, you know the Moon Knight is nearby. Like Batman, he uses themed gadgets. What is most iconic being his moon-shaped throwing stars, similar to the Batarangs, his Moonarangs, are a little bit more threatening, as you'll see they aren't shy to pierce through flesh. In my opinion, they're more of an accurate depiction of how you'd use a throwing star type device, as even though they pierce flesh, they aren't necessarily used for killing with Moon Knight. Though that's never off the table with him, but we'll get to that more later. Not only does Moon Knight have the moon-themed gadgets, he has moon-themed vehicles, including most notably his moon chopper or various moon-shaped flying devices. But he's been known to rock other moon-themed vehicles in the years. Just as Batman has his Batmobile and Batcopters, Moon Knight likes to parallel that use of technology in his adventuring antics. Moon Knight is also, much like Batman, typically tied to a city. While over the years he has moved between cities, whatever cities he is in gains the association with Moon Knight as being his city. He's operated in Los Angeles, but in his current run, which I think is a great starting point, he's back in New York running his midnight mission. And his mission, much like Batman's, is truly altruistic. He is trying to rid the night of any who would threaten those that travel by night. So all crime, all supervillains, anyone who would bring harm to others under the dark of night are Moon Knight's targets. Similar to how Batman has a zero tolerance policy for crime. But the parallels don't just stop with the suit and the gear. Moon Knight is exceedingly rich, much like Batman, and while his wealth does fluctuate, again, similar to Batman, who, if you haven't kept up with Batman, lost his wealth a couple years back and has been slowly regaining it, Moon Knight is more often than not living the lavish lifestyle and funding his own use of gadget development, much like Batman. He is slightly different in the sense that he doesn't usually design his own gadgetry. He often pays people to do that for him, because unlike Batman, he's not exactly a super genius. But I honestly think that makes the character a bit more grounded than Batman, who gets, all the positive traits of being a billionaire and a genius. Moon Knight, he's just rich. He has people to do that for him. As you may be aware, Moon Knight has multiple personalities and personas due to his dissociative identity disorder. And while his rich persona is Stephen Grant, he also has a prominent taxi cab driver persona called Jake Lockley. And I bring this up because this is kind of another similarity to Batman. While Moon Knight doesn't consider himself a detective like Batman does, he does a lot of detective-like information gathering using his personas. Like the Stephen Grant persona, you'll find, can get information on the criminal underworld just with his money and connections. And Moon Knight, using his Jake Lockley persona as a taxi cab driver, can get information on what the common person knows about the criminal underground. Much like Batman uses the Matches Malone persona to infiltrate gangs and such when that's necessary for him. So again, while Moon Knight isn't a detective in name or profession, he does operate as one at times, and what he does, and it works out, is very satisfying. Now, let me quickly touch on the few things that make Moon Knight a bit different than DC's Batman, and then I'll transition into what I think is the perfect jumping on point if you're interested in learning more about Moon Knight, which is Jed McKay's 2021 run that I am going to gush over for a little bit here, because it's my video. But yeah, the big difference that some might say makes him unlike Batman is that Moon Knight is willing to kill. However, I'd point to the fact that Batman has killed before in a lot of his early iterations, And there are several Batman stories that see Batman get pretty close to killing, like leaving a mercenary locked in a room with no way out. And by any metric, the guy who was locked in that room should have died and was only saved by retcons. So I'd say Moon Knight dishing out a kill here and there isn't that much different than Batman. Moon Knight just has a better idea of when to apply it. Moon Knight is a bit more liberal with dishing out kills than his crusading counterpart, but what separates him from a character like Midnighter, who I talked about in a previous video, is that murder isn't Moon Knight's first response usually. Moon Knight prefers to simply beat his opponent until they submit to him, and he is willing to put criminals behind bars. This makes when he does choose to deliver the killing blow a lot more interesting, and the kills end up feeling like they have more weight, which keeps all the stories pretty tense. And they don't often revive his dead adversaries very quickly, so you know if he takes somebody out, it's going to stick for a while. Because it's difficult to know when he'll pull out the killing blow, that makes a lot of characters tense around him, like Taskmaster, who's actually afraid to fight him because of how unhinged Moon Knight is, as well as putting the Avengers and Avengers West Coast team on edge, as they don't like how unpredictable he is when he comes to killing villains. Anyone who fights Moon Knight knows it's not off the table, and that makes his encounters more fun to read. The other big difference, of course, is that Moon Knight does have powers from time to time, although they do keep them a bit few and far between. At one point, Moon Knight did have the ability to get enhanced strength at night, so if you're reading that, you should know that's no longer the case, hasn't been the case for many years. The modern run of Moon Knight has introduced new powers for the character, but his most prominent power at the moment is also one he can't use super liberally, but that is his ability to resurrect. Now, this resurrection ability is something Moon Knight has always had, though it's been a bit ambiguous at times when it was used. Of course, it was first used when Mark Spector became the Moon Knight after falling in a battle and being resurrected by Khonshu. Much like how the death of Batman's parents shaped everything Batman's does, this resurrection of Moon Knight by Khonshu defines the character and comes up quite often about as much as Batman's dead parents do, which is a lot. And it's just one more way Moon Knight is basically Marvel's Batman. After being resurrected, Moon Knight is devoted to Khonshu's mission, even when he's not as devoted to Khonshu himself, as a lot of things have happened over the years that have made that relationship a bit more tense. But now I want to talk about how Moon Knight is getting even more and more like Batman in recent years, while also carving out his own niche, and I will explain that, and why Jed MacKay's 2021 run of Moon Knight is a perfect starting off point if you want to get into Moon Knight today. Jed MacKay's Moon Knight: The Midnight Mission is a perfect starting point for new readers. A starting for me in a comic is a comic that doesn't make me feel like I have to read every comic that came before to get up to the current story. One thing new readers of comics need to understand is that, especially for Marvel, they don't reboot that often. And at times that can make you feel like to get caught up on what's going on, you have to read everything that came before. But I feel like Jed MacKay's Moon Knight sets up a new status quo for Moon Knight and actually puts him into a new-ish role for the character that makes it so you don't have to read everything that came before to get into the story. His story recaps a lot of what happened to Moon Knight previously and resets a lot of his character. The modern Moon Knight's personalities are more unified and he's less insane, which in turn makes him more like Batman, but also makes it so you don't have to worry about a lot of melodrama regarding split personalities or something like that, which I think is good for the character overall. All you really need to know going into this is that Khonshu tried to defeat the Avengers previously and is now imprisoned, which has reset a lot of Moon Knight's social standing among other heroes and caused his wealth to take a hit. Effectively, this sets Moon Knight at more of a base level than he was before, and since he lacks some of that wealth, a lot of the side characters that he used to run circles with don't come up, since he can't afford to talk them. But let's talk about this new status quo. The Midnight Mission is Moon Knight's new initiative, where he basically takes up a base of operations where the work can come to him. Moon Knight now services a lot of the underrepresented supernatural groups of New York to differentiate himself from characters like Daredevil or Spider-Man who operate in the wider New York. Moon Knight can now help those affected by cases they can't exactly deal with. In Jed MacKay's new run, you see him dealing with a lot of vampires, ghouls, and specters, And honestly, the Midnight Mission itself is a magical creature. This is a truly unique space for Moon Knight to operate in that I think adequately carves out a nice niche for him. While some may think of Doctor Strange as being the supernatural protector of New York, Doctor Strange is actually more of a global defender that doesn't actually contend with many of the minor magical threats like vampires in New York. He leaves that to characters like Blade and now Moon Knight. But of course, this doesn't sound very much like Batman. Batman doesn't take requests, so what am I talking about? And I'm talking about Moon Knight's new crew. In Jed MacKay's run, Moon Knight is basically establishing his own Bat family. Moon Knight has always had people he's employed, but they weren't usually other heroes or people that were operating with him in the field. This new team is much closer to a Batman-Robin dynamic, while also being unique in its own right. Moon Knight's secretary Reese kind of serves as more of a Robin type character along with Soldier. Soldier and Reese help Moon Knight with field work, and he's slowly training them to be better in and outside of the field, which definitely gives you that Robin and Batgirl kind of dynamic. Hunter's Moon is introduced in this Moon Knight run. Hunter's Moon being basically Moon Knight's parallel, a brother-in-arms if you will. I think the most apt comparison to Hunter's Moon is probably something like a Nightwing, someone much closer to Batman's level. I know in DC Comics, Nightwing and Batman are essentially fully equal. Hunter's Moon, unfortunately, is still solidly not as effective as Moon Knight in terms of combat, but he's not very far behind either. And Hunter's Moon brings occult knowledge that unlocks new powers for Moon Knight, such as being able to summon the zombies of the previous Moon Knights from Khonshu's afterlife. And before anybody gets into the comic saying that was a one-time thing, it's not. Hunter's Moon has done it in another fight, if you were paying attention, so this is something that they can just do now. Though Moon Knight himself hasn't done the ability more than once, it's definitely in his wheelhouse to do it again, if needed. If the Batman comparisons weren't strong enough already, Moon Knight even has his own Catwoman. Tigra. Tigra and Moon Knight are in a very strong on and off relationship, just like Batman and Catwoman, and that dynamic is unchanged in Jed MacKay's Moon Knight, and honestly, I'm here for it. Tigra is a lot more solidly in the moral good camp than Catwoman, and she also is okay with killing others, which in my book makes her a much more interesting character to read. Tigra is a character I wasn't too familiar with, but reading her in this run has definitely piqued my interest to learn more about the character. I think it would do the same for anyone looking to get into Moon Knight as well. You might find a few things you're interested in learning without it being required, which is what makes something a good starting point. But yeah, this Moon Knight run introduces a lot of older Moon Knight rogues, giving you a little bit of previous Moon Knight history so you don't have to go and read up on every single thing, while also giving you enough of a taste to recognize them if they show up later. The main villain for the first arc of this run is Zodiac, which is essentially Moon Knight's Joker in a lot of ways. He's a character who's insane, but in a different way than the Joker. Zodiac is obsessed with Moon Knight, much like the Joker is obsessed with Batman, in the sense that Zodiac could be doing literally anything else, and is just choosing to mess with Moon Knight. And it's dark and funny and unsettling all at the same time, which is exactly what a villain should be. And Zodiac definitely proves to be quite the threat in this run. And I'll avoid big spoilers, but just know Moon Knight definitely struggles against this character. But yes, whether Moon Knight lives, dies, or even kills, Zodiac is all on the table in this run. And if you have any interest in Moon Knight, I definitely suggest you check it out. His version of Catwoman, the Bat Family, and how he defends his city in this issue, in this run, definitely remind me of the Detective Comics era where Batwoman and the Bat Family have to defend Gotham without Batman. It gives me a lot of that flavor in terms of the teamwork, and that makes it fun to check out. And it's just a different flavor of Batman. Putting Moon Knight up against supernatural foes is also a stroke of genius. This is actually kind of the direction I wanted to see them take Red Hood in the Batman comics. At one point, it was the direction they were going with the character, giving him supernatural bronze swords to fight undead and supernatural enemies. And for a character who's supposed to kill others, that's always a smart move. Putting them against a supernatural enemy allows them to kill them without as much of the moral quandary of it. And things like demons and vampires can always come back, so it's never that jarring if you want to bring back a supernatural enemy. It's just a smart move to put him in this space. But he also has the flexibility to fight humans like Zodiac and other regular villains. And it's just a perfect concoction where everything just feels natural, based on how Jed MacKay wrote the character. If this sounds like something you'd be interested in, definitely check it out. And if you think Moon Knight's a better Batman, tell me down below. I'd also love to hear your arguments for why he's worse. if you have them. And yeah, if you liked the video, leave me a like and subscribe. And hey, thanks for watching.